Hey, 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 welcome to this basics class. I have one more class after this one. This is all about the very basics. How do you start? Maybe you're thinking about doing watercolor, but you just don't know what you need to purchase, what supplies are required, what are just fun, and maybe you're someone that's rusty. You know how we all go through life where we have a chapter, we are able to do things, and then we have a chapter we're tied up with whatever comes up in our lives. If you're a little rusty, this is a good review of what you need. And if you fall in a category that you've been painting for a while, if you're like me, it's really nice to go back to basics. Every so often, I just like to organize my things. I like to remind myself, here's what you should have. This is what you remind people to get. So this is really a good one for all of us. I'm not going to be painting, or if I do, it will be very little, but I'm going to just simply review everything. Before I get going, let me also remind you of two things. One is the very last pop-up is a week and a half from now. It's Saturday, the 21st. I'm going to be gone for a week starting tomorrow morning. So I'll be back. And what is that subject? Drum roll, please. The subject on that is color temperatures. So how do you know if something is a warm shade or a dark, or excuse me, a warm or a cold? And while I was talking, my little brain was going, yes, and you don't know the hue of it because dark and light matter too. Even with people, if you've ever had seasonal analysis, if you're on the warm side, you could either be a light warm or a dark warm. And if you're on the cool side, the same thing. So colors are important. They evoke emotions. They can be very useful in paintings. And if you've got a color wheel, bring it. It's not a necessity. If you don't have it, no biggie. I certainly do, and I'll show you all about it. That's our last pop-up. And then our first and only 90-minute class will be a loose one on Thursday, January 26th at 1 o'clock. And that's a regular class. I'm going to make it loose for lots of reasons. It's beginner-oriented, and it's fun and easy. It's $11 for 90 minutes, and that includes the tape afterwards, and that includes you sending me a picture if you need to. So consider writing that down too. And I think that's it. That's all my housekeeping I wanted to tell you. So I've been leaving this up because I want you to either take a screenshot of it or scribble it down, or if you're on a big thing that you can't take, like a laptop, take your cell phone and take a screenshot. Every artist and every instructor has their color palette lineup. Some instructors have like 24 colors or 20 colors. Some have 9 or 10 colors. With me, these 12 shades are what I base every class on. And this is what I call the first tier of colors that you can paint anything. Now, if you're hooked on watercolor, like many of us are, we have a blast getting more shades. We get second tier colors. We get third tier colors. Colors that fit into second and third tiers would be like the quinacridone colors, quin gold, or Aussie red gold, or indigo, or so there's opera pink comes to mind. Karen Buckley, I'm thinking of you. You are an opera pink girl. All excited when you got that color. So there are several tiers that you can get into with extra colors. And as you familiarize yourself with painting, you can go from there. But as we all know, there are 3 primary colors, that every color in the world that your eye can possibly see are based on 3 colors. And those primary colors will fit into the next class. But since I brought them up, they're red, yellow, and blue, and everything you see here and anywhere. Isn't God magnificent that all these colors are from these 3? So That said, I hope you had a chance to check them out. Now, when you get these 12 colors, I'd like you to get them from a decent brand. And my decent brands continue to grow. I typed some of them out here and I'll show you them. And these by all means are not all of them. But Winsor & Newton is a company that started a lot in the watercolor world. They started the concept of keep putting them in tubes and making them available. And they're still considered a gold standard by many. It's Winsor & Newton. But they make a brand called Cotman, and that's considered their student brand. However, Cotman is better than many great brands. So if you ever have a chance to buy a little Cotman kit and you're fairly new with watercolor especially, feel free to get Cotman. Winsor & Newton sometimes has been so expensive. Some of their shades are so expensive, they keep them locked behind glass doors. I remember going to a store needing something because I was taking, I think it was a couple of years ago, so now not that long ago, I decided to take a water-based course at the university, and she gave us a buttload of colors. Holy cow, were there a lot of colors. I'm looking around to see if I see my list, but I don't. But she wanted us all to get Winsor & Newton, and I'll tell you what, I wanted to comply, and I did, but some of the colors I went to the store to get, I went to AC Moore at the time, which has since gone under, but they had to unlock a glass case to get one of the shades that she required in her list of needed colors. So that's another story, but don't go bankrupt getting colors. Cotman, I actually printed this to show you. I usually suggest you get tubes. For most people, tubes are a good way to go. And I'm going to show you how to set them up soon. But now and then you can buy them pre-poured. If they pre-pour paints that are cheaper, and many cheaper paints are in the squares pre-poured, they put them on a big tray and they just cut out all the slabs, and they have lots of filler and not a lot of pigment. And I usually tell people, when in doubt, stay away from pre-poured. But then you have brands like Daniel Smith, who tells everyone, I promise you, it is they're hand poured and they're exactly the same contents and makeup in the recipe as the tube. Well, I could take that to the bank because Daniel Smith is one of my favorite most used colors. Winsor & Newton, here's a Cotman, and this was a little set. And it has almost every one of my 12s. And I saw this the other day, and I actually, when I say the other day, it was actually several years ago, and I bought these for my sisters. And it was a little travel set, and it was pre-poured squares, and it was very decent quality, and it's Winsor & Newton Cotman. And here you go with all their wonderful colors. So there's the thing, whether you get the pre-poured already in the squares or the tube paint, if you know for a fact it's a reliable company, you can go ahead and get it in the squares. Here's another very reliable company, and I bought these all pre-poured. They're top of the line, Roman Schmal. They're from Europe, and I would never have a problem suggesting people get these pre-poured as well. So there you go. Daniel Smith has more colors than anyone. That's their claim to fame. Excuse me. There we go. I'm into, and I know some of you are too, Pat, you and I talked about this brand. I wrote it out phonetically, but it's My Mary Blue. And I was on a mission to find out how to pronounce it. So I actually wrote to the company. How's that? I heard it so many ways. It's an Italian company, My Mary Blue. So that's one word, that's their brand. It's not just a blue color. My Mary Blue is a wonderful brand. They have many single pigments, which are very rich and very well made. A lot of times the filler is the difference. Holbein's great. Core is a really nice. They're known for their oils, and they came out with very nice watercolor. Grumbacher is kind of like Cotman. It's a little bit on the student side, but there's nothing wrong with it. I started with Grumbacher when I went to a watercolor workshop 21 years ago that got me hooked on watercolor. I still have the palette and I still would feel comfortable using it. Don't you love how watercolor reconstitutes, re-wets, unlike anything else, you can use it forever. I've recently come across Marie's. Marie's has several levels, including student level, which is so-so, but their Marie's Master is a reasonably priced, very decent set, and I recommend them. Van Gogh, I've had wonderful experience with Van Gogh. Schminkel, M. Graham is great. It's got that honey base. Here's some of the brands, and I could continue on. And those of you watching this that have painted for a while, you could add your specialties and the ones you've fallen in love with. But I thought this was a good starting setup. Pick one. A good trick, if you're not used to buying watercolors, is to see if it says the word professional by it. Not always, because sometimes they lie, but if it says professional, it usually means it's the level that's not going to hold you back. You want your paints to not be anything like children paints. You will never get a good result if you don't have a decent paint. I'm going to keep going back to this as I lay this out. Another thing that you're going to need, and if any of you need me to send you an email with this, just email me. I do have different starter, like here's my recommended supplies, but I'm going through the ones that I recommend for you supplies now. I'm going to talk fast, so listen fast or pause the tape, because I want us to get through what we need to talk about. White gouache is one of those things that I use a lot with my classes, and I like the brand M. Graham, but any good white wash, I like titanium for the color. M. Graham is reasonable and has a huge size tube. What is this size? 21, I think. 2 fluid ounces, there it is. So it's a good size and it lasts a long time. White pastel pencil, I recommend you get that. You can use any brand or even chalk is fine, but I use that a lot off and on. This is Stabilio. And I also suggest that watercolor paper you always get, and I wrote this wrong, you always want 140-pound cold press when you're starting with me. Sometimes I've done in-class live classes where I've had them paint the same thing on hot press and cold press, just to show the difference. The hot press is very smooth, and the cold press will add to your painting by having a nice texture to it. Watercolor paper, when you start, I'll tell you, there's a lot of snobbiness with supplies, and I ain't there. So I'm going to tell you, in my opinion, there is 100% nothing wrong with Canson watercolor paper. There is something wrong with painting on Canson multi-purpose. It has to be watercolor paper, 150-pound cold pressed. There's nothing wrong with it. When you are learning to paint, it will not hold you back, contrary to what you'll hear elsewhere. I feel strongly about that. Now, as you continue to paint, I've got so many different brands that I use. I use 100% cotton each and every time that I am doing a consignment for somebody. The gold standard by most people is Arches. And when you get to the point where you're ready to just continue to improve, you want something similar to Arches. And Arches does have the 100% pure cotton, the way that it's created and rolled. You can buy it, you can stretch it, you can wet it. There's lots and lots of ways that you can get involved with paper, but I'm just going to say 140 cold pressed is what it's all about, specifically made for watercolor, especially if you're new. Now, you're going to need an empty palette if you're buying all of your tubes. And you'll want to, and this is an important thing for those of you that are new, you'll want to test your paints and you'll want to label your paints. And I don't know if you can see clearly, but I take a fine permanent black marker. I write every name down. This is probably a second tier one that has a lot of unusual colors in it, but the concept is the same. And the brand that I recommend when in doubt for an empty palette that's very reasonably priced and will do you well is Magellan. It has an extra tray that you can use for mixing. You can go ahead and mix things in it. There's just nothing not to love. So Magellan is the one I use for almost all of mine, but I have lots of them. And the main thing I want to remind you to do, whichever one you're using, is to, if you've got more than one brand, do the brand and test it at least 2 colors each one. For example, this is transparent red iron oxide. Watercolor, more than any other color, can look very different between the two. This is with hardly any water. This is with a lot of water. And see how these colors can look totally different. And certainly it will look totally different in your dry palette kit. So all these colors, you're going to do a little test. I recommend that you pour and squeeze out into a palette 24 hours before you use it. Now, if you don't have 24 hours, such is life in the fast lane, but at least let it dry. When I create palettes for workshops or for classes that I supply everything, what I do is I always pour it and print out the labels and do everything at least 24 hours before, because it's humid down here in Myrtle Beach and I don't want things getting all sticky when I'm transporting it. In watercolor, I recommend you do not paint directly from the tube 99% of the time. Instead of painting from the wet tube, which is going to give you a different texture, I want you to get used to wetting your paints as we go. So that is that. You'll also need a graphite paper or light board. Now let's talk about light boards. I always don't bring them along, simply because my lights are gonna make it, and you can see some of my studio lights on them. This is a brand, by the way, I like. I can't turn it upside down because I actually do have it on a cord, but it is called Accurate. ACURIT, Accurate Light Pad. Don't you dare, unless you just have money you want to throw away, don't buy any that are overpriced. It is the exact same light board, light pad in the overpriced world as it is for $19. So if you need help with that, just talk to me. Amazon has them. A lot of people have them, but if you buy them from an art studio, they're usually, or an art store, they're usually more expensive than Amazon. I plug it in, and I plugged it into my computer, so I can't bring it out far, but I did plug it in because I want you to see how these work. Let me see if I turn that off, it might help a teeny bit, probably not. Nah. That's not going to help either, but I'm going to show you anyway, because that's just who I am. I want to show you. So say that I have these flowers and I want to get a basic sketch to design my paper before I paint it. I'm going to put it on the light board, put it straight down. Most light boards have 3 levels. So I'm going to, and this one does too. I'm tapping at 1, 2, 3. Okay. Now, normally I would put my watercolor paper on top of it, whatever I'm using. But in this case, I thought I'd cheat and use the typewriter paper so you could see a little bit with all the lights washing it out. So if you can see that tiny little bit under it, you take your pencil and you just and I already tapped it out. Oops, 1, 2, 3. All of you that have those taps, you know what I mean when you tap them. You get your wrist bite and it goes out. So you just very gently outline what you want to paint what you want to see. The beauty of, and you usually do it obviously on a watercolor paper, not a tiny thin one, but I thought, let me see if this will help you see it in this class. So for this, you're going to outline where you're going to go. And then once you've outlined it, and I'll get that out. And here's another brand here, by the way, that only has one, but it's a fairly bright one. Once you have it, that you have outlined it on your watercolor paper, then you can take an eraser, and I recommend a kneaded eraser, and you can tap it, you can soften the lines, you can be very delicate when you use a light board. This came from people using windows, and if you want to try it with a window, you first put it down facing you, then you put your watercolor paper on top, scotch tape it to a window that faces the sun, and you can trace it just like the light board. The problem with that is you have cloudy days, you may not be able to do it someday. So the light board, if you don't see it well, dim the lights in the room that you're sitting in. The darker, you don't have to sit in the dark, but if you can't see it well, and as we age, our eyes get weird on us, right? If you can't see it well with a light board, consider going to a darker room or darkening the lights that you use. I do all my sketching on the light board in the room when I'm watching TV. And I'm sitting there watching TV and I turn the lights, I turn the end table light off. I turn the main room lights off, and I can see it beautifully. If I'm struggling with something hard to trace, then I'm not going to see it beautifully, hardly, whatever I do. And then I make that room as dark as I can. I might even turn the TV off. So that's my tips for how to transfer. And once you have that, then you can start painting on it. And here's one that I started, and I haven't put any background on it. I didn't put any leaves. I didn't put any darkness. All I did was just play around because I thought those colors were kind of fun to mimic. And so I started out with this and tracing it. Now, if you don't have a light board or you prefer to use this instead, this goes on the blank paper. And then you put this on top. My suggestion, if you're using graphite paper, and make sure the graphite paper is shiny side down, my suggestion is to push your pencil ink back in, your pencil lead. And then be careful, don't move it, and you're going to trace it. The reason I like to push the ink in is I want the original to stay clean when I'm looking at it as my reference. So then you're going to do this. The downside of using graphite is that it does not erase well. It's supposed to. They say it's going to erase. That's why you get graphite, but it doesn't. It doesn't erase half, 3/4 as good as when you use a light board. We're almost done with your necessities. And by the way, one more example of what that means to be, I wanted to show this real quick. This was one of my classes during the month of December. And you would take this, and with the graphite paper, I did this one. With the graphite paper, I pressed down, and you'll see I cannot erase, period. I cannot erase or lighten it. In this case, it would work out just fine. But here's the idea when you're doing this kind of scene, is you might just simply transfer trace just where the main line is, maybe where a couple of the tree centers are that. And then when you paint it, it comes to life. Some people wonder, is tracing cheating? Is this or that? And I'm here to tell you, I might have 20 people in a class. They all trace the basics, and all 20 have a different look. The painting is what it's about. If you are a good sketcher and you want to be freehand with it, you're welcome to do it. But every master, even from the Renaissance times, used little tricks to transfer their sketches. So it's giving you a good base, and no, it's not, because the painting is what's going to make it your artwork. There's also things called loose painting. This was from last year, if anyone remembers that. Just a very loose painting. And we don't use any sketches. We just go through it. A lot of times loose paintings are good with flowers. You'll notice there's a little trim around here, and that is another product as I rush through to tell you about it. And I know I'm past 15 minutes. So real quickly, this is a tape that is my favorite lately, and Pat turned me on to it. It's called Scotch Delicate Surface, excuse me. And the surface, it comes off easier. I just like this brand. I've stuck with it forever. I use it for my classes. It's a light purple. It's easy to see. And you put it around the paper, and when you remove it, you have an automatic little self frame. These are also done loose, just me playing around. And this was something done loose without me tracing first, but just going to town with it. So we paint both ways. We paint loose or free without tracing. And sometimes I'll send you a photo and say, go ahead and transfer this on. And you want to print it? Nowadays, most of us have home printers. You print it and then transfer it however. You want paper towels. You also want a micron style waterproof pen. And then you want 2 containers of water. You can use whatever you want. I like mason jars, but whatever you want is great with me. You want a white gel pen. I like white Jelly Belly, like Jelly Roll it's called. Let me get closer. I'm racing through, people, hang in with me. And then your brushes real quick. Your brushes that I'm going to recommend for you are 3 round and 1 flat for starting. I recommend you do a 4 or a 2. This one happens to be a 2, a 4 or a 2 for smaller. Round just means it's tied around the base, the barrel, in a round way, but they have a nice point to them. So you want round. You don't want anything but round when you start out, especially, and these will be your workhorses anyway. Then you want an 8 or a 6, and here's what they look like. They're quite a bit different, but when you're just starting with your brushes, either 8 or 6 will be useful for the same type of things. If you have a choice, go with 8, but 6 is also great. And then you want a 10, 12, or 14. This happens to be 14. And you could also use a quill or a mop. This brush is called a quill and also a mop, very similar to the 14. And then you need a 1/4 inch or 1/2 or 3/4 flat brush. And they come in different brands, different size handles, but a flat brush will really be helpful as well. So those are what you need. That's how to do the transfer. That's your paper. That's everything to get going. Do you need every one of these 12 to start? No. Do you need every extra thing here to get going? You do not. But if you want to have everything to get going and start painting with me in my classes, these are all of the supplies that I'm going to recommend to you and why. So I hope that was helpful for you. I'm going to end this. Sorry, it was a little longer, but I just wanted to give you all the basics of what you need and how you can get started in watercolor. Trust me, if you have the supplies and come to a class with me, you will be amazed how quickly you will learn things and the techniques of how you're using this list will make all the difference in the world. I hope that helped you. As always, ask any questions if you need to.